Hi, everyone. I have a special guest on my show. His name is Erik, and he has a really amazing channel on personality typology. And he's starting out this new channel, which is on neurodiversity. And I want him to be able to share his message regarding it because I think it's a wonderful message. So, welcome to the show, Erik.
Thank you so much, Leon. It's nice to be here. And yeah, I thought I'd reach out to you and earlier after our discussion we had on my channel previously about AI, because
Mhm.
I know that you've talked a lot about neurodivergence in the past on your channel, and especially about ADHD. And yeah, I'm just starting out on that. So I'm starting to finally like dive into and discuss and talk more and research more on these traits. I'm wondering, like, what kind of experiences do you have about this so far, and like, how do you look at neurodivergence and neurodiversity, and what's your message when it comes to these topics?
Yeah, so for me, and it's interesting because now you're interviewing me now, but I'll ask you a similar question too. So for me, I grew up with ADHD, something I still have, and I didn't understand why, I found it so hard to function in the world. It seemed like I was getting everything wrong, like things that were just so easy and obvious people to other people were not easy and obvious to me. But what I've learned is that over time is that there's things that are actually obvious to me as a neurodiverse person that they're not obvious to other people. It's important to have that sense of perspective. Otherwise, we will be living with a sense of guilt for our lives. So the message I want to send is like to be able to own up to your own value and to live your truth, that people who are neurodiverse are here to be able to provide a different perspective to the world, and we should embrace that. So if you're not neurodiverse, to be able to allow neurodiverse people to be able to express their own strengths and feel valued.
That's
Mhm.
such a good point. I recently met a girl with ADHD at a party, and she kept mentioning how she felt like I'm not smart, I'm not intelligent, and I
Mhm.
don't do this and I can't do that, and so on. But what I found so interesting when I listened to her was, she has this like she had this amazing ability to, see multiple options, to see nuances that most people that I talk to would miss. And so sometimes I find, like, when it comes to like people with ADHD, a lot of them have a lot of judgment and shame and guilt around like not being able to do certain things that they're expected in today's society. Well, at the same time, we're not always missing or like recognizing, areas where people with ADHD actually perform really well, areas where they're actually
Yes.
really intelligent. And so,
Hmm.
like, I wonder, do you have like experiences with that, or and what do you say like
Hmm.
would be your strength? What do you say is the strength of ADHD?
Well, the thing is, in the medical field, ADHD is primarily diagnosed in a way that emphasizes the weaknesses, it emphasizes what is wrong here, right? And that's
Yeah.
understandable because the focus is to try to find problems and to be able to address those problems. But the thing is, what the research is showing is that people with ADHD are actually, they tend to be more creative, or they have traits that are similar to creative individuals. And that's something that's important for us to take a look at and to embrace. I was in a master's program studying creativity psychology. And
So cool.
yeah, and my advisor has said, for every kid who's tested for ADHD, please test them for creativity as well, because we don't want kids to feel like they're broken and they're only meant to be fixed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem with the medical model when we approach these topics, because I totally understand that when you have ADHD, or when you're autistic, or when you feel or are neurodivergent, you might need extra help in a lot of situations, and there might be certain aspects of modern life that are more difficult for you, right?
Yes.
And so I totally understand that these people will seek out a diagnosis and will look into what they can do. But a lot of the time I feel like we have this medical model where we're like, there's this normal way for the brain to work, and how do we get everyone else to work this way? And in a way, like,
Yes.
what's happening then is like we're getting a less diverse society, because we're like fostering everyone to think and act the same way. And so, like, one thing that I was reacting to that I want to discuss on my new channel is also like that of masking, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think when we think about masking, we are like, it's when people feel they have to compromise themselves or act act in a certain way in order to fit in a way that's often very stressful.
Mm.
And so like what I see is people that mask more, they're usually more exhausted at the end of the day. They have less energy for things, and they have more mood swings, and they're also a little bit more up and down. Like even if they can hold their mask on in certain situations or at work, maybe outside of that, it's very difficult because you have a limited amount of willpower to do these things and to adjust in this way. And beyond that, like I feel like it's not just neurodivergent people that are masking, but I feel like to some extent even neurotypical people are masking, because nobody is 100% able to adjust and arrange themselves according to the normal structures that we have at our workplaces today or in school today. And
Right.
sitting still in a school environment for 8 hours is difficult for almost any kid, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a way that things are structured that they could be restructured in order to meet the psychological well-being and benefit of everybody. I think society could be different in its design so that allows for us to be able to flourish and to be able to do our best. It's true that people who are neurodiverse, they may be struggling much more because of how things are designed in society, and that causes a lot of suffering. And because I work as a therapist, I just see the same thing. People with ADHD in particular, but like other people with they could be learning disabilities and so on and so forth. There's that ongoing sense of guilt, like because there's that expectation you need to keep up with everyone else, like the things that other people find to be obvious.
Yeah.
But you don't. You remember it's important to remember your gifts and remember that you are able to do things that others can't.
Exactly. And I can say, like, for me, like, the reason why I also wanted to start this channel and start exploring these topics more was because I also had a lot of struggles when it came to school, and when I realized very early that my brain didn't function the way like other kids in school experienced it. But I never really got the diagnosis for it, and nobody ever really took me seriously when I asked if we should investigate it or look into it or think about it. But from a school point of view, okay, so what was really going on for me was I was what you'd consider to be like a gifted kid in school. So I was given some options to study advanced literature, to skip certain classes, and to start a year early in school. And at the same time, I was not really, allowed to get to progress at the pace that I really wanted to. And I actually kept asking and fighting for an opportunity to push myself forward. So in some ways, like I didn't struggle as much with like the shame that can come from like being neurodivergent, but more when I was younger with anger, in a sense, like frustration, constant boredom, constant like feeling like I was being held back or like not allowed to do what I wanted to do. So like I think there's an aspect to talk about that too, because like a lot of neurodivergent people respond to these issues with shame, but I also know some that are very angry for different reasons, because they feel like, why am I being made to do this, and why am I expecting to engage in these tasks? Like one thing I hear from neurodivergence, for example, is that neurodivergent people, you often want an explanation or a reason to do something. If a teacher says, do this, often for a neurodivergent person, it's why should I do that, for what reason?
Yes.
But a lot of time they're like, just do it, right? If you start asking those kind of questions in class, you can be seen as insubordinate, or like you don't listen, or like you don't respect the teacher. So there can be those struggles too, right?
Right. It's important to keep in mind like the needs of people who are gifted, right? Because they do undergo their own struggles with the system itself. So like for me, for my experience is that I was a particularly creative child. I think within the school system, it wasn't like particularly encouraged. I just saw myself as having an issue, like being able to go by the structure of the school and to be able to do things like everyone else. I was like very absent-minded. I would lose things very easily. I would space out constantly. So I had a lot of issues, and teachers expressing disappointment of why can't I get these things that are not like supposed to be very obvious to do. So I decided, like when high school started, that I'm going to put away all my creative activity so I could focus on being better at doing what's neurotypical. And I didn't know like how bad that would be. So like I basically sacrificed everything that I valued and everything that made me a strong person, right? And just I spent all that time trying to do well in school and all that, and I was able to do decently well, but after a lot of struggling because I'm not like listening fully. I'm always making mistakes, so I felt like I spent the whole entire time trying to like catch up a bit. So
A lot of people talk about giftedness burnout. Like I think in general, we can talk about the neurodivergent burning out more often than average in
mhm,
general. And what I was thinking about for this is like it's so important that we send a message that regardless what kind of neurodivergence you have or what's different about you, that you learn that you can be yourself and that you don't have to do anything. Because I think a lot of time, it's the pressure, it's the feeling like you have to perform at a certain level or do a certain set of things. I think that's what
mhm,
kills the creativity, because that makes you start comparing yourself a lot with other people and what other people are doing. And if you are constantly comparing yourself to other people in society, there's no way you're going to be creative, because you're going to be just mimicking other people. So there's going to be nothing creative about that. But if you can learn to tune that out and stop looking at and comparing yourself to other people, I think that's absolutely vital. You check in with yourself. You start like considering your own feelings. You start thinking about what it is that you want. Because say if you're only trying to do well because you at work because you want to please your boss and make other people happy, you're not going to do anything creative, because your boss is going to pay you for your work that you do, right? And not
mhm.
for what it is that you want to do. But if you start like caring less about that and start caring more about what it is that you want to do, you're going to find that suddenly you start having ideas, and suddenly like you come up with projects, suddenly like there's things you want to do and energy and passion in that.
Right. Yeah, there could be a lot of pressure from society. Um, but like the more we listen to ourselves and our own voice, we naturally create what is creative because it's coming from ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to mimic others because just out of fear or out of a need to perform or something along this line. So I think, society could be kind of redesigned from education system up to be able to value creativity more.
This all makes me think, it would be so cool to like come up with some kind of recreativity like boot camp or something like that, or like some kind of,
Yes.
like set of like courses or like things or exercises that people can do, like if they feel like they've lost touch with the creative aspect in themselves, which I think happens to most people at some
Hmm.
point in their life. It can also
Yes.
be when you're going through like I had like depression during a bit of my mid 20s, because I was absolutely, I'd worked so hard in politics trying to, get other people to like me. And at some point, like there was nothing left in me. Like I was
Mm.
absolutely burnt out and exhausted, right? So at that point, like what I needed more than anything was to meet creative individuals that could inspire me. I needed to read books and engage with literature and podcasts and with
Hmm.
stimulating people, with interesting people. I needed like things that, yeah. For example, I needed to go out more in nature. I needed to, get myself to do certain things that were more for fun, not just for work, right? So
Mm.
the professional part of my life needed to go down a bit, and the recreational and more silly and childlike parts, that's what I needed the most.
Yeah, creativity comes from having space, ironically. Yeah, there's something about the culture which very much emphasizes productivity. So if you look at schools, there's less time for recess. There's also parents who want to give them to carry kids ADHD pills during the weekend, right? Not saying like, you know, the drugs aren't necessarily a bad thing, but like this idea of we always need people to be productive and effective, it actually hurts creativity because you're just engaging one part of your brain, which is the forebrain.
Yeah.
But creativity involves you playing and you having space. There's a study that when there's a job meeting, it's like kind of like almost like a party kind of situation, more ideas get generated as a result. Kids learn faster through play, through recess than they through simply just by hitting the books.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like you can't create in a full space. So if
Mhm.
there's already so much around you and everything has already been done and like there's so much going on, like, yeah, there's no space for that. So I think you're absolutely right on that. So, yeah, definitely like if you're in those situations, like getting the space to just sit and do nothing. I used to definitely have that like idea that I had to work 60-hour shifts for a long time. Like in my late 20s, I was working crazy hours, like 60 to 70 hours, right?
Mm.
And for the beginning, like that was amazing. And I was performing and producing so much, right? But what I didn't realize was that the quality of everything I started doing slowly started going down. And not beyond that, I started repeating myself a lot more, like saying the same things over and over again. And yeah, like that's people don't always see that when they're trying to be super productive. They're
Right.
only seeing the things that they're doing and the day-to-day work, and there's no time to think about great perspective of where you're going with your content or why you're making it.
Yeah. It's all about like having a sense of balance. And for that, for everyone, it's different. So it's good to like be productive, and it's also good to have space, right? There's the yin and the yang, and maybe some people are more like to have more consistent energy, especially people who are neurotypical. People
Yeah.
who are neurodivergent often work in bursts. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
important to respect that, while also like, sometimes it can get too far in one direction. It's good to kind of find that balance in between that works for the individual person.
Yeah. One thing I noticed with myself was like from an early age, I could discipline myself to anything. I stopped eating candy and I didn't eat candy ever again. Like I'd never drank, I never smoked, and I actively like hid my parents' cigarettes. Like
Hmm.
I was extremely like able to discipline my and manage my own emotions. I went to bed at the same time every evening. You know, uh, if my parents told me to do something when I was a kid, I just did it without like I was like, yes, okay, sure.
Hmm.
So in a sense, like I was hyper disciplined, right? And that's something I noticed later on in life because yeah, I could steal myself to write for a week, just produce like up to like 50,000 words a day if I wanted to,
Yeah.
and just like write like a madman, right? And I had these abilities to push myself really hard, but I didn't always have the capacity to manage my own boundaries and energy.
Mm.
So, like, I do that, and everyone would be like, "Holy crap! How is he like able to do that?" And like at the same time, after that, my brain would feel fried. Like I feel like I would smell the like burnt paper. Like it was so weird because I was like absolutely dead. I couldn't form words after I did things like that. Like,
Yeah.
so my ability to just strain myself and discipline and focus on a task for a really long time was really high.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I absolutely couldn't focus myself on things that other people expected me to focus on, right? So in school, like I couldn't force myself to do the math book because I felt it was boring and I already knew the answer to everything. So I was like, yeah, well, should I do that? So, yeah.
I work with people who have ADHD, and what's very common is that it's often the case they generate a lot of ideas, right? Not all of them consider themselves to be creative, because I think
True.
in culture, like in our culture, we define creativity as having like a product. You come up with something at the end, you produce a lot of something, right? So
Yeah.
that's a very narrow view. I think a lot of people who are creative, they don't value themselves because they generally, what the research shows is that they're good at generating ideas. They're kind of poor at execution of ideas. So I think a more balanced view is that people who are creative, they have strengths and weaknesses, and it's good to help them to value their ability to generate ideas, while also helping them learn how to execute their ideas, rather than saying, well, you didn't make anything, so you're uncreative, right?
Yeah. But sometimes I also feel like the standards get higher because the more ideas you have, the more things you have to execute, which means that there's a higher likelihood that you're going to have more unfinished projects, not because you did less work or produced less, but because simply, yeah, like if you have a million ideas, you're not going to be able to complete all of those. That's not going to be possible, right? But if you only have one idea, well, that's simple. you
Yes.
know now you can say, oh yeah, I executed all my ideas.
Yeah. Hmm.
No.
Yeah.
um
Something I like to tell people with ADHD is that, you're gifted with coming up with ideas.
yeah.
Try to run with like one or two of them, and learn how to like kind of break it down, basically. So we get people with ADHD often get overwhelmed with the number of ideas.
Yes.
It becomes paralyzing. So how can we take that like and break it down into something that's easier to look at here?
Right.
And or you could partner with somebody who's different. Their brains are designed differently. Maybe they're very good at execution, but they have like no ideas, right? So I think,
Uh-huh.
collaborations are beautiful. I think there's so much of focus on like us versus them, like feeling like neurodiverse people, they don't have a place, which, it could very much feel that way. And but also like the counter of like saying like people who are neurotypical don't have value. That's not true either. Everyone has their values about us working together.
Yeah.
Well, Erik, thank you for being on my show. Can you tell everyone the name of your channel that you're starting up?
Yeah, so my new channel is going to be Forest for Thought. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about stimulating intelligence and giftedness in everyone. It's about exploring the forest around me and the nature because I love to be out in nature. But it's also about telling stories that make people think about neurodivergence, about giftedness, about ADHD, autism, and other forms of gifts and intelligences and things that people have.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of exciting material. So everyone be sure to check that out. I'll put a link to Erik's new channel down below in the description box.